everyone, and welcome to tonight's ICS Faculty Fellowship Public Talk, titled How Many Times Can You Learn That Lesson? A History of Hazing at Ohio Public University from 1920 to year 2000, presented by Dr. Rebecca Mancuso. I am Valeria Grimberg-Pla, Profesora de Español and Director of the Institute for the Study of Culture and Society at BGSU. Part of the mission of ICS is to engage the BGSU campus and communities in conversations about important issues in our community and society. And what better place to do that than the Wood County District Public Library in the heart of our town, where everyone is welcome to gather, connect, and find a comfortable corner in a space that truly brings our community together. Indeed, public libraries are exemplary in the way they serve communities, ensuring that knowledge, technology, and opportunities are available to everyone, not only those who can afford them. The ICS Faculty Fellowship Program brings speakers who help us examine the institutions that shape our lives by leveraging the strengths of the humanities to support community betterment and growth. Through these conversations, the program encourages broader social, cultural, and civic engagement and expands access to ideas beyond the university. Public talks held in libraries further support the mission of ICS by sharing knowledge in open community spaces dedicated to learning and to dialogue. Before we begin, I would like to acknowledge that Bowling Green State University and its campuses are situated in the Great Black Swamp and the Lower Great Lakes region. This land is the homeland of the Wyandot, Kickapoo, Miami, Potawatomi, Ottawa, and multiple other indigenous tribal nations, present and past, who were forcibly removed to and from the area. We recognize these historical and contemporary ties in our efforts toward decolonizing history, and we thank the indigenous individuals and communities who have been living and working on this land from time immemorial. The acknowledgement of land, labor, and systemic racism included here is a way to show respect for indigenous communities, but it is meaningless without action. As you navigate the world around you, we ask you to recognize and address inequitable practices in your organizations and communities. This includes stereotyping, no to little representation for indigenous, Latinx, and Black communities, queer people, and people within disabled communities, as well as inequities in education, housing, law, health, and commerce. Accordingly, I also want to recognize the often invisible labor of the people who have prepared the space, who will clean it after we leave, and those who work to maintain it. Big thanks to the Wood County Public District Library for allowing us to use their space tonight. Thank you, Kristen. I would also would like to thank the ICS team, Phoenix Morgan Ellison, Rodaline Ode, Halima Lulali, John Sobayo Abiola, and Emi Cloutier. And Emi and Phoenix are here. Thank you for being here today and helping us with the event, because they've all worked very, very hard to prepare this event. Today, it is my honor to introduce one of our Spring 2026 ICS Faculty Fellows, Dr. Becky Mancuso. Dr. Mancuso is an associate professor in the Department of History at BGSU, a specialist in Canadian history, local history, and public history. Dr. Mancuso is committed to what she often calls history from the ground up, connecting archival research with community engagement and public scholarship. She coordinates BGSU's Canadian Studies minor and regularly teaches courses on Canadian history, public history, and research methods at both the undergraduate and the graduate level. The project Dr. Mancuso is presenting today examines the history of hazing at a public university and explores how it has become deeply embedded in elite campus organizations, including fraternities, athletic teams, and student clubs. Tonight, she will discuss how examining the historical development of hazing can shed light on the power structures and traditions that sustain it within university life. Her work provides important context for ongoing conversations about accountability, prevention, and creating safer, more equitable campus communities. So, and just some very quick announcements. If you would like to be added to the ICS listserv, please write your name on one of the sign-up sheets over there to learn about more events like this. If you are not already doing so, please follow ICS on social media and listen to the Big Ideas podcast. Just yesterday, we released the last episode about literature across borders, war, migration, and Latino storytelling, where we interviewed the acclaimed Peruvian writer Claudia Salazar. And earlier this week, I had the pleasure to interview Vicky Mancuso, and we are going to release the episode with her in the fall. So if you want, after this talk, to learn more about hazing, you can listen to her in the fall again. So, but without further ado, now please join me in welcoming Dr. Rebecca Mancuso.
Thank you very much, Dr. Grinberg, and thank you to the Institute for the Study of Culture and Society for this wonderful opportunity. I love teaching, I really do. It's been wonderful, though, to have a semester to dedicate to this research that I've found captivating over the last few years. So we need to have conversations about hazing, and it's difficult anyway to talk about hazing, but it's especially difficult to talk about it when it's a problem at home, and it is a problem at home. So we're talking about home. I recognize that that's difficult. It's difficult to accept that hazing is so embedded in our own institution here, even if we don't work at BGSU or go there now. I mean, it's such an important part of our community. And so we're going to be tracing the history of hazing tonight at Bowling Green State University. So why would somebody do this? It's kind of demoralizing research, but as I say, it really drew me in. I started with this in the late 2010s. I was working on a methods course, and some of my students and former students are here. They don't tend to love methods courses very much, right? So I wanted to find something that was engaging, that they could look at with some ease, something that they would relate to. So I thought, let's look at BGSU history, let's look at the history of student life and the crazy antics that students get up to. So my students were looking at that, and I thought, okay, I'm gonna look around too. And we were looking at streaking, we were looking at, some of you remember things like Manville Madness and some of those big parties in Bowling Green. So they were doing that, and I just thought, I'm going to start looking up hazing. Let's see if there's anything in the archives, in our university records. I was bowled over by the number of documents and photos that were in the records at the Center for Archival Collections. Hundreds and hundreds of documents on hazing, going back all the way to the early 1920s. And I thought, this is really interesting. Let me just keep looking at this. So I spent some summers just looking at the documents over and over again all across the 20th century. And I was still doing it mainly for the course. But then COVID happened, so I wasn't able to get in very many archives. Many of you know, because I know many of you, that I studied Canada. I wasn't able to get into Canada for 4 years, so I really started looking at the local history. So I was doing that in 2020 and 2021, and then we lost our student, right, so Foltz in 2021. So it happened here, and we are on that list of universities that have seen a hazing death. You know, and how could this happen here? Well, it's not unusual that it happens here, right? So we need to look at this. I'm not presenting Bowling Green in a negative light. I'm not trying to cast Bowling Green in that way, or show Bowling Green as worse than any other university, because it isn't. It's very typical. And when we do local history, we might look at a locality to show how it's different or how it's a good case study, you know, how it might be typical. And that's where Bowling Green comes in, because it is fairly typical. We see the same patterns and trends that we see throughout the country. So it's good for a deep dive into the institution. So that's what I'm doing with the local history. Historians can, pull examples from all over the country or internationally, broadly, right? But we can also trace it through time in one institution. If we narrow it geographically, we can really dig deep. As my students say, local history studies are a mile wide, but miles and miles deep, right? We can see change in continuity over time. We can see cause and effect relationships. We can see power relationships at work. We can even see how individuals might have a major influence on the direction in which things go. So that's why I like local history. And again, I'm writing about home. So as many of you know, I was born in Bowling Green and got my BA here, and got my MA here, and was gone in Canada in the 90s, but I came back and I've been here for over 20 years. So I've got that some institutional memory, and I have that local historical knowledge. I know people to talk to about these things. I've talked to some of you already about these things. So that helps me do a good study when you're really familiar with something. So here are some of the research questions that pulled me in. But I want to point out here that, Bowling Green is now well over 100 years old, and hazing has been part and parcel of university culture for like 80 years. So it's not going to go away quickly, right? And we have to see how deep its roots are at BG. And, then we can extrapolate, it's the same elsewhere. As I'm going along, if you have some questions for me, or something's not clear, just let me know. I don't have a lot of time to talk about hazing in the distant past, of course, but it's thousands of years old. So as long as there have been educational institutions, there's been hazing. The ancients talk about it. Some of the practices that we have now and the terms that we use come from like the Middle Ages. So if you look at this lithograph here, this is 1500s, but you see these older students with their horns. This here is the green horn, and you've heard that term. So the new freshmen, yes, oh, yeah. Thank you, I bumped it, there we go. Okay, thank you very much. Here's the greenhorn, and he is got literally his nose to the grindstones, so he's called the greenie or the freshie. You see the term beanie and beanus up there, which can relate to those beanies that freshmen were supposed to wear. He's being treated terribly, of course, in that lithograph, but the idea is that the new students coming in, they're beastly, they're immature, they need to go through this kind of trial by fire, it's a rite of passage, and they can be, as we used to say at BG, they can be full collegians. Here's one from Princeton, and you see it's very humiliating that he's getting dunked in the water, he's had his clothing removed, that's from the late 19th century. Another one from the US, from Union College in New York, he's pulling his ball and chain around. It's interesting to note that in the background, everybody is kind of happy about it, snickering and laughing, because in the past, hazing was largely considered, prank, joke, those kinds of just student antics that they get up to, and really not something that university administrators should really be concerned about, right? Okay, I was also surprised to learn as I got into this research that in the English language, there's no one book dedicated to the history of hazing. There isn't one. I kept looking and looking. I may find something, I'm not finding anything, right? I've even had librarians help me. There are books on hazing, but there are books on the phenomenon, hazing practice, published in the 1990s, 2000s. What are students doing? Why are they doing this? And they're prescriptive. What might we do to end hazing? But I'm finding very little history. What I'm finding is in sections of books, little pieces that I have to put together. So that's been a challenge. But long-standing part of university life. So yeah, hazing's been going on for thousands of years, but the 20th century is really significant because in the 20th century we see some major changes in hazing practice. For thousands of years, hazing was newcomer hazing or freshman hazing, sometimes called academic hazing. And it was the hazing of all the freshmen who would come in to an institution, all at once, all together. Every single freshman would be hazed. They would have this general university hazing period, and they would have to be put through these trials. That kind of hazing will decline by the mid-20th century, it will disappear, and it existed, again, for thousands of years, and it would be largely replaced by what we call social organization hazing or social hazing. Okay, so freshman hazing would exist at BG, as in many other places, until about 1950. It was very public, very carnivalesque. Students bragged about it, talked about it. You know, the whole town knew that it was going on. And it will be replaced by a different kind of hazing, and they'll exist simultaneously for a little while. But social hazing is what we see in those student organizations, like fraternities and sororities, honor societies, sports teams to some extent. That's a little different. But that's what we deal with in universities today. That's what's vexing administrators right now. What we don't know how to dislodge it. But there was this major shift, so we're going to trace that through the 20th century. So Bowling Green kind of fits, right? Because it's created in 1914 and then grows throughout the 20th century, so we can really see this change. Where does sports hazing fit in? That's a tough one. Now that's where we don't have as many documents from UG about hazing. We really don't. Much of what I'm finding out about sports hazing, I'm finding out through oral interviews of people who are willing to talk to me. Many people aren't, I understand that. Sports hazing is a little different. It has elements of both of these freshman and social hazing within it. It's not the students who decide who's on the sports team, right? It's the coaches who decide who's on the sports team. But newcomers are still hazed to show their loyalty and their commitment so that other team members know that they've got their back and that kind of thing. So it's a little bit different. And some researchers like Jasmine Burgess, Hank Noor and others tell us that we should look at hazing in different environments. So I'm not able to look at sports hazing as much because it doesn't come through in the documents here at BG. That disturbs me a little bit because it appears that a lot of our athletic offices didn't necessarily turn over their documents, right? They just weren't as forthcoming with them. So Greek Life, Dean of Students, other offices just give the archives all their documents, but you can go and do a search. This is after my period here, but you can do a search for like Urban Meyer. You never know he was here because none of his documents are here, right? Jerry York from the 1980s, his documents aren't here. Did you have a quick question?
What about marching bands?
Yeah, marching band, I'm getting some of that through oral history, a little bit of documentation. But a number of people in marching band are willing to talk to me. And that's an interesting one because it appears that there has been some hazing. But what's important to my research too is that I talk about how attitudes change over time. So the people I'm talking to from the 70s, from the 80s, they're like, well, you didn't think it was hazing at the time, but we do now, right? So I'm glad you asked that question because I'm framing my research in part through this with this notion called, it's Nick Haslam, and he calls it concept creep or concept expansion. And what that means is that our ideas of what constitutes harm or trauma or abuse, they've changed tremendously over time, right? So in the 20s, people didn't talk about emotional abuse, or even in the 70s. So some of the things that the band was doing, the marching band would kind of justify it by saying that the band members needed composure when they're playing and when they're performing. And sometimes fans from other teams are mean, so they would kind of line them up and make them march and scream at them and throw things at them and things like that, with the justification that they're toughening them up, So they did things like that. So it's really with oral interviews, it's hard because the folks who talk to me, they say, their ideas in their own heads have changed so much because they didn't think they were hazing then, but they do now. Our definitions have changed. The concepts have crept up. So now, things that were not considered abuse in the past are now abusive or traumatic, right? Okay, good question. So I continue to look at sports, but I'm a little bit limited there. But by the 80s and 90s, it comes through. I'm able to see more there. Okay. So let's talk about freshman hazing. This is the hazing that was dominant in the early decades of BG's existence. A lot of it comes in from Europe. You see some of these practices at the British private schools, British colleges. And after Bowling Green was established, the students talk a lot about how they want to be recognized as a real college, a full university. So we're going to adopt these things that other universities do, because this is what Ohio State does. That's what BG does, right? So if Ohio State's doing these things, we're going to do them too. So they adopt these practices and treat all the freshmen quite terribly coming in. But this freshman hazing, again, was kind of like a rite of passage. You got to leave your parents behind, got to come on campus, toughen up, learn how to be a real collegian. This poor guy, this is from the yearbook. You can see it's the sophomores that are lining up, getting ready to beat him up. And we have evidence of a lot of beatings and paddlings. Sophomores would stand around campus and just wait for freshmen to walk by and just hit them with paddles or chase them, throw them in the pond, things like that. So every year the freshmen had a number of rules they had to follow, and these rules were developed in the late summer by the Spirit and Traditions Board. That's kind of a precursor to Student Council. And the Spirit and Traditions Board would get together and draw up the things that freshmen had to do or could not do. And the university president would sign off on it and approve it, and they would hang the posters up all over campus. So Homer Williams would sign it, and they'd also put it in the Sentinel Tribune, our local newspaper, so everybody in town could know about it. They would have to wear embarrassing clothing, maybe draw mustaches on their faces, wear ribbons or signs around their necks, roll their pant legs up, things like that. Failure to comply with the freshman hazing period and follow the rules meant that you'd be ostracized, thrown in the pond. We have evidence from 1922 of a situation where there was what's called a freshman parade. So the freshmen all had to line up. Some of them thought it was fun. You know, again, they weren't necessarily traumatized. Others hated it. They had to line up, paint their faces, put their clothing inside out, dance around, make animal noises, and they would end up in the yard of Homer Williams, our first president. Two students didn't want to do that. They didn't want to take part. But they were chased and tackled, taken downtown and hitched up to a wagon. They had to drag the wagon through downtown to the jeers and catcalls of students and the townspeople. So those were the kinds of things that could happen. Here are BG's freshman rules from the 1930s. It doesn't have a date. It's written on the back that it's from the 1930s, but here's an example of those that would be hung up around campus. You know, some of them are kind of silly. Freshmen will be allowed to date but one girl a night, okay, but here are the kinds of behaviors and clothing that they have to wear. The freshmen were always depicted as babies. This is going to help them grow up, right? And really, it's a kind of mass bullying, but it was also done to help the freshmen belong. It's kind of hard to accept, but the only policy of belonging at BG was freshman hazing in 30 years, you know. Okay, so I can put that back up at the end if you want to do some more reading. Yeah, so approved of by the administration, and students were not supposed to complain, although I have a lot of evidence that students hated having their food adulterated or things stolen out of their rooms. They didn't like being woken up at night. This is what happened to Chatsel Hall. Young women were woken up at night, dragged out of the dorm and forced to do games on the quad, and then they were forced to drink concoctions of milk with magnesia and vinegar and salt and pepper and things like that. So often hazing happened in the dorms too. So what was the reward for freshman hazing? Well, you were happy when it was over, really, that was the reward. But upperclassmen said, oh, just wait till you get to do this next year. It's so fun. You get to take out your revenge on the incoming class next year, take out all your rage on them, and then everything is okay. All right, so when we talk about change and cultural change over time, this was not a wellness campus, okay, in the 20s and 30s at all. It was the in loco parentis period. You know what that means? In loco parentis means in the place of the parent, right? So the university is taking the place of the parent. We think that might mean that the university is going to take good care of the students, but that's not really what it meant. In loco parentis meant that the university was shielded from legal responsibility when problems happened. So just as before the 1980s, children couldn't sue their parents except for really egregious circumstances, but children didn't. the legal system didn't recognize it, right? Children couldn't sue their parents in the same way students couldn't sue their university if they were harmed. So, what could they do? They couldn't do much. They put up with it. So that has changed considerably. The mid-20th century will be kind of a free-for-all, and we call it the bystander era, where the university's like, oh, just, have your man go bad, just go nuts, we don't care what you do, But then now we're in a different era called the caretaker era, where universities are beginning to be held liable for hazing problems and can be sued. So universities now have to do due diligence to make sure that they are creating a safe environment for students and preventing harm and things like that. So we see that shift. Okay, so freshman hazing happened every year to these poor freshmen through the 20s, through the 30s, and a little bit into the early 40s. All this crazy stuff going on campus. But another kind of hazing is going to take root at the same time. That will be the social hazing within organizations, okay? The 1920s were what historian Nicholas Syret calls a decade of prestige at colleges and universities in the country. Students, just like today, they wanted to pad their resumes with all kinds of activities and make themselves stand out. They wanted prestige, they wanted more status. At BG, they actually use the word big man on campus, like, oh, look, there's the big man on campus. They talk about that figure, that leading figure. Everybody wanted to be that, so they're joining honor societies and creating them, and they're creating their own social societies and musical societies and things like that. Professors create a lot of societies for different disciplines and things like that. The cream of the crop of the different disciplines, and everybody wants to be in these organizations, on student council and all of that. But what gets started at Bowling Green in the 1920s are these social organizations, fraternal and sorority organizations. They're not the Greek organizations yet. They're called local organizations. So they're created just locally here at BG. They have their own unique names, like the Commoners. The five brothers there, you see, they were named after a kind of tobacco, I guess. They had smokers. Those were the rush parties that they had. The Commoners, Seven Sisters, Delhi, the 3K, the various, Delhi is there. There were quite a number of them that are popping up at Bowling Green, but the National Greek organizations were not interested in them yet. Bowling Green was too young a school, so they will, for the first couple of decades, exist as these local organizations. They're the Commoners with their paddles. They will, in the 40s, become Pi Kappa Alpha, Stone Coates' fraternity, so they're one of the oldest on campus. Here's a photo of a young man being thrown in the pond. That pond is behind Mosley Hall on campus. If you walk there, you'll see a depression behind Mosley. That's where that pond was. Okay, so those groups had rush initiations. They existed at the same time as freshman hazing. Let me go back a second, sorry. They existed at the same time as freshman hazing, and what's going to happen is that freshmen coming into BG, they're going to be hazed twice, some of them, or multiple times. They're going to be hazed as freshmen. They're going to be hazed in, say, the Commoners. They're going to be hazed in the Honor Society. They might be hazed in the band. And there's a lot of hazing going on, and they're going to start thinking about, well, what's worth it to me? And freshman hazing is going to lose favor in part because it has more cost than benefit, but students see real benefit to joining these organizations. They really were kind of cream of the crop. They were bankrolled by local lawyers and businessmen and even professors. They had their off-campus housing, they could have drinks and better food and things like that. So they were pretty elite, and they saw themselves that way. Okay, so there's a major shift in wartime, right? Freshman hazing and the social hazing in these organizations is going on simultaneously, but the war is really going to bring an end to freshman hazing. There was freshman hazing in 1940 and a little bit in 1941, but the war had already broken out in Europe, right? And so students are starting to become kind of military-minded, war-minded, and they're already starting to roll bandages, work for the Red Cross, gather supplies for the war effort and things like that. And then with the bombing of Pearl Harbor in 1941, everything is going to change. campus will almost be drained of men, right? And the enrollment will drop considerably, you see there, and it's almost only all women that are left at the university. So for the duration of the war, there won't be any freshman hazing. Gender has something to do with it. But also, you know, it's just seen as unseemly and juvenile and just inappropriate in a time of international crisis. Bowling Green will become a naval training base with the V5 and V12 programs. V12 program is for officers. And so the students coming in will be very, very different. They'll be older. They're you know, war-minded. They're going to be leaving for active service soon. So that changes the culture considerably. So freshman hazing really begins to die out. Right after the war, a lot of students coming back to campus, they'll want to revive freshman hazing. They'll say, let's do it again. It was kind of cool, it was fun. We didn't get our chance to haze the younger students, so let's revive freshman hazing. But the veterans that are coming into campus aren't going to have any of that, right? Right after the Second World War, there are these veteran cohorts going through. I mean, they fought in the Pacific, they fought in Europe at the Battle of the Bulge. They're not going to put up with freshmen, or excuse me, sophomores chasing them around to paddle their behinds. You know, especially if they're older than these sophomores, it doesn't work. Many of the veterans are married, things like that. So they really do not want to see freshman hazing reestablished in the late 1940s. But they'll keep trying. They'll keep trying. They're going to try to reinvigorate it. Even when Ralph McDonald comes in 1951, I know, again, it's kind of hard to think about. Ralph McDonald comes in 1951, he's like, yeah, let's do freshman hazing again. Let's get that started again. Get the paddles out and everybody, you know, chase each other around campus. Just over, you know, a little less than a decade, the knowledge of freshman hazing and what it was really like starts to fade, right? This is a picture from the freshman handbook. It's very posed. These older students are pretending to hold this guy over the pond. You see he's got his beanie on, and it says, oh, upperclassmen do a bit of hazing, but we must add that they never threw him in. So a lot of students on campus call for a kind of gentler hazing, or let's just sort of go back to the fun aspects of freshman hazing. So they're very nostalgic about it. They don't remember the freshmen getting beaten up and smashed with paddles, and they don't realize that actually freshman hazing was very dangerous in its day. There were a lot of deaths around the country from freshman hazing. Not at Bowling Green. There were some injuries at Bowling Green, but no deaths. But people did die from some of those things that you saw, you know, having their heads shoved in the water. At some schools, people were thrown in large bodies of water and drowned and things like that. So they have a nostalgic view of it. So they try for a couple years to bring freshman hazing back, but it doesn't work. It has more cost than benefit. There are a couple of other things going on at BG. In the 20s, how many students do you think BG had, like in 1925? What would you guess?
6,000.
What's that?
Maybe 5,000, 6,000 at most.
You know what? 500, 600 at most. So really, it was between 400 and 600 in the mid-20s.
We were still a teaching school.
Yeah, well, it'll change in the mid-20s. It'll be sort of liberal arts college, but yeah, it just makes that change. There are only about 600 in the mid-20s. By the late 20s, they're like 800. So in the 20s, everybody kind of knows each other. They know who's a freshman, who's a senior, things like that. When you get into the 1950s, that's when it's like 5,000 people.
McDonald was very staid. He put up with that.
McDonald? Well, he didn't like drinking.
Right.
So the fraternities and students got in lots of trouble for drinking, but not hazing. Hazing wasn't bad. Drinking was bad, okay, for McDonald. Yeah. So, I mean, I have lots of records of hazing from the 50s, but it's the alcohol that gets him in trouble. Yeah. But when you have a campus of 5,000, it doesn't make much sense to try to haze the newcomers. How do you tell who they are? And you don't know them. You might never see them again. So in the 50s, people begin to identify more with their subgroups, their majors, and their social organizations that they join, like the fraternities and sororities, band, and things like that. And they just freshman hazing seems kind of worthless to them. So they leave off, and it happens around the country by the early 1950s. In the 1940s, the fraternities and sororities, it's got a it's actually got a sensor in there, I think. Yeah, there we go. The fraternities and sororities do affiliate with the Greek organizations. And at that time, the president is Frank Prout, and he says that the arrival of these Greek organizations on campus was, quote, the fullest campus accomplishment of student life, unquote. So he was very glad that the Greek organizations had come, because Bowling Green now was a real respected school, and this was going to do wonderful things for student life. So he was very much in favor of that. So from the late 1940s and into the 50s, the fraternities and sororities will really dominate campus social life. And we're going to talk about them mainly. Again, I don't have as much on sports, a little bit on the band, but not much. But there are folks who say that I focus too much on the fraternities and sororities, that I single them out. I think they single themselves out, okay? So if I can just go down a tangent here, I do this in class all the time. But if we want to look at some statistics, if we look at hazing deaths, and in this case I went back to the 1950s, there are databases of hazing deaths. Going back to the 1950s, we have approximately 110 hazing deaths from 1950 to 2020, okay, 110 hazing deaths. 86% of those were fraternities. There were some others that were military. There was a marching band death, Texas A&M. There was one of the Masons and some other groups like that. But if you look at the 2000s, from about 2005 to 2020, it's like 90% of the deaths are in fraternities. And their proportion keeps going up. So, yeah, I focus a lot on fraternities, but they're the ones who have kept a lot of these traditions alive. The band does haze, they do haze in sports. We don't see the deaths in sports, but a lot of the other organizations like honor societies and things have left off even social hazing, but it's the social organizations that continue to do it. And this is a key. This is one thing that I just want you to think about, take with you to understand hazing. Researchers, anthropologists, psychologists are showing us from all these experiments that they're doing that what's going on most likely is that membership is valuable, right? And we can think about that in our own lives. If we're going to, say, join a church, or if you want to immigrate to a country, I mean, you have to go through all these hoops, you have to go through all these requirements, put some skin in the game, you know, to be in the group. And that's what's happening with hazing, especially of this social type, right? If you're going to be a member of the group, you have to prove your loyalty, your commitment, you're going to keep the group's secrets, even put the group's welfare before your own. And sometimes you see that in hazing practices, and when something goes wrong and there's a death, you see how quickly organizations will close ranks, right? Get their story right, get their lives together, cover things up. I mean, they do that kind of thing. So when new members are coming in, the existing members really want to make sure that they can vet their membership. And they want the new members to go through trials that grow in intensity over time. And that's the reason we have Hell Weeks. Every other year, Bowling Green has abolished Hell Week. They never realized that they've already abolished it before, but you see it all the way from the 40s up to now. Oh, we've abolished Hell Week. Yeah, you abolished it in the 40s, but it keeps coming back, right? They abolished paddling, but it keeps coming back. Because we just can't get rid of these tests, it seems, for membership, forcing people to sacrifice. And young students don't have much but their skin, right, that to give. They give of their emotional and physical health to prove their loyalty. There are other things going on too, shared trauma and trauma bonds. These are young people who are taking risks, things like that. You know, so all of that plays in too. But this explains why, and when we get into the 80s and 90s, all the administrators here at BG, and everybody's saying this, they're saying, let's just do healthy team building exercises, right? Let's just encourage fraternities and sororities and clubs to, go and serve food in a soup kitchen, and that will be a good bonding exercise, and they won't need to haze. Well, they go and serve the food at the soup kitchen, and then they go back to the locker room or the fraternity house, and they haze anyway, because they're doing this. They're vetting their membership, right? It's also important that at BG, some of the organizations, most of them, were allowed to police themselves. So you have the Interfraternity Council and what will eventually become the Pan-Hellenic Council. And they got to investigate and adjudicate any hazing issues, right? So they're policing themselves, and it will be several decades before administrators at BG are able to wrest that power away from them and start to create better hazing policies and procedures and take the power to make these decisions in hazing cases. This is from the 1960s. Fraternity membership will really plummet in the 1960s because students are concerned about the Vietnam War and international injustices, and it's not so cool to conform in the 1960s, but there were still many fraternities on campus. This is Kappa Sigma. I think this is an interesting photo. There are several like this in the yearbook that year. So Kappa Sigma, like other organizations, was asked to submit some photos to the yearbook, and they submit this, which shows you, how they want to be known, what their identity is. So they're still pretty open about it in the 60s. The administration's like, what are you going to do? The students being students, they're not going to sue us. They just can do what they want to do. So we have quite a few pictures like that. Okay, I'm getting toward the end here. I know I'm overwhelming you with stuff. This is where I am now. Oh wait, let me say one more thing here. Sorry. About the 1960s, because I do want to mention, it's the 1960s when we see African American fraternities come onto campus, right? And they're quite different. They have different hazing practices, and it's very delicate. This is not me saying this, but it's the researchers like Ricky Jones who do it, and some of you are nodding, and Hank Newer, Gregory Parks also does research on African American hazing. And African Americans in the past, and even sometimes in the present, defend their hazing by saying that it's a racial exercise that they're going through, that they need to haze their members harshly to prepare them for life in an oppressive country, right? So it is in African American fraternities in the 70s when BG first sees branding of the skin or carving in the skin. African American fraternity members could be recognized because they had to carry heavy things around campus, like big shields with African designs on them, or bricks and things like that, to kind of show their sacrifice. And they say it's our tradition, it's our heritage, and it's important for a brotherhood and all of those things. So they will really, really resist any involvement in their fraternities. They will not, for many decades, they won't be part of the Interfraternity Council. They won't, submit reports to the university or anything like that. They're pretty much unaffiliated, right? And the university's concerned because they hear about these things, but they can't get these fraternities to open up a little bit. So that's some of the things I'm looking at in the 1960s. I'm going to go through this fairly quickly. In the 70s and 80s, that's the era of waking up, of really waking up to hazing and its dangers. It doesn't happen all at once, but I did find a couple of very long memos from 1979 and 1980. And in 1980, it's Don Ragusa, who's the Dean of Students, and he comes in and he just is, I can tell from what I'm reading that he's been going through a lot of files. And he is seeing all these reports, and he's like, what is going on here at BG? Why are students doing this? He finds out about the branding of the skin. One student has a broken vertebrae from paddling, punctured eardrums, and people fainting in lineups, and alcohol poisonings, all kinds of things like that. And he sends these memos out, and he's like, what are students doing? And other administrators, and I'm not blaming them, because they're in the thick of it, they don't really know what's going on, right? They don't know the institutional history, really. They don't quite understand hazing. So other administrators at BG say, it's not a problem here. It only happens once in a while. It's like a one-off, and we get rid of the bad apples, and then we don't have to worry about hazing anymore. We don't have really serious hazing incidents. But these things keep coming. What happens in 1981 is the Phi Delta Theta incident, where a young woman is used in a hazing ritual sexually. She's sexually assaulted by numerous fraternity members as part of the ritual. It becomes known because she has to go to the hospital. Now, this causes an uproar among the student body. You know, what's going to happen? What happened here? It was all quite secretive. Wood County convened a grand jury about this, and it's sealed. I can't get into it, but just from reading memos and BG News coverage and local news coverage, I'm getting a sense of it. So the pledge master was fined, and he was expelled from BGSU. He goes to Ohio State and enrolls, you know, months or two later. None of the other fraternity brothers are punished at all, and Phi Delta Theta is suspended just while this is going on for a couple of months, but the fraternity is fully reinstated after a few months. And the issue, this is 1981, the issue is consent, right? And people are saying, well, you know, what was she wearing and what was she doing in the fraternity house anyway, and you know, these kinds of things, and did she give tacit consent? So consent's an issue. I know, different ways of thinking. I mean, people didn't even talk much about domestic violence in the early 80s. BG, one of the reasons the fraternity brothers were not convicted or anything was that, or suspended, was that BG had no sexual assault, no rape policy whatsoever. And in memos going back and forth, they're like, rape doesn't happen here. It's never happened before. So we have no policy. So they didn't know what to do with this. So they did get the pledge master for like hazing, but not for sexual assault. It didn't like exist. Yes? Oh, you're just upset. Yeah, I know. I'm reading this going, what? But the student body really reacts to this and says, oh, is this what we're doing now? And fraternities are misogynistic, and they're, you know, coddled, and they're never punished, and so, yeah. What do you think?
You said BGSU convened the grand jury, or Wood County?
Wood County.
Because I was thinking, where are the police and all this? Why did the police say this came right?
Apparently they came to the hospital, but again, the woman herself, as far as I can find and looking all over, she didn't press charges. Just when her name released is 1981, she would have been dragged to the mud. So, yeah, that's what we think is going on. And if all of campus is talking about it, the more people talk about it, you know, we think that she withdrew from the university, but I can't figure that out right now. But it's a horrible situation. Still, administrators they're struggling with this. So again, I don't blame them, because they're trying to figure out this problem. But they come up with all kinds of interesting things that they say. Some of them say, you know, hazing, it's only existed for a couple decades, and the veterans brought it after World War II, which is not true. And other ones say it's a thing of the past. Some of those old fraternities used to haze really bad in the 50s, but they don't do it anymore. And so this one fraternity is kind of an outlier. And you know, all of these things, they're trying to figure it out, but there's not a lot of literature on it. They don't have the institutional memory, all those things, okay? So they start to come up with some policies, but these policies to our eye look terrible. But they're trying to understand. One of the policies that they put in place is that organizations like fraternities, sororities, band, and all that, they can create their own definition of hazing, okay? And they can differentiate between hazing and what they call pledge duties. So in this period, hazing would be, you know, really harming somebody physically. But a pledge duty, like if you wake the pledges up in the middle of the night and make them scrub the floor with a toothbrush, that's a pledge duty, that's not hazing, right? So they're still kind of trying to get the definition down. They don't have good definitions of hazing in their policies. But each organization is supposed to say, these are our initiation practices. We're not going to do these hazing things. Here are the other things we're going to do, but according to our definition, it's not hazing, right? They also had a policy in the mid-'80s where if you complained about hazing, let's say in a fraternity, you would sit down in a room with your hazers and you had to confront them and kind of work it out, right? So the issue of retaliation is significant, and they were trying though. I mean, the administrators come through pretty well in the documents as they try to figure out what's going on. The problems of hazing were really publicized because the mother of this hazing victim, Chuck Stenzel, he dies in New York at Albert University. He's given a 6-pack of beer, a bottle of liquor, and he's locked in the trunk of a car, and he's supposed to drink those, and he dies from alcohol poisoning and also exposure, cold. And she comes to Bowling Green, his mother comes to Bowling Green to speak about hazing. So students are talking about that, all right? So I again don't have a lot of time to talk about this, but we see shifts legally in the country too. By the 1980s, courts are sometimes deciding against universities or university officials that courts say should have known that something was happening or should have kept a better eye out to prevent things from happening. So universities fear litigation, right? And in 1983, Ohio does pass a bill criminalizing hazing. It's just a misdemeanor. I don't see much evidence of people being prosecuted, but it is a misdemeanor. And the university, BG's upset about this. They're like, oh no, all of us officials, the staff members could be held responsible. So they really start to try to keep these social organizations under a short leash, but the fraternities are going to fight back. And they're all in BG News, all kinds of advertisements and things talking about how fraternities are not the hazers, it's other groups and things like that. Very interesting, this kind of battle going on. So administrators are still saying that hazing is not a big problem at BG, but they have managed by the early 90s under Ed Whipple. He's the vice president of Student Affairs, you might remember him. He really does take control of hazing decisions away from the Interfraternity Council and other groups, and he creates better policies and better processes surrounding hazing. But this is pretty much where we are now, right? So as we move into the 2000s, there are some very public incidents with women's sports. There were some really serious incidents with sororities too, stomach punching and all kinds of horrible things that come to light too. So we're now in that caretaker era, and we're in the era of litigation. Where we are with hazing now, I do believe that universities like BG do care about the student body. They're really working to try to prevent hazing and educate on hazing. Our education this year on hazing was better than it has been before. But we're in that era where universities now are very concerned about risk management and insurance. And the national fraternities and sororities now are investing hugely in insurance to try to shield themselves. So we're not coming up with a lot of solutions. There's so much more that I could say, but I think I'm going to end it there so that we can have the conversation, because I went over time, sorry about that. I'd like to hear some of your questions, your comments, things you remember. Yeah, Alex.